Well, mixed reactions have trailed the presidential assent of the Petroleum Industry Bill, now an Act 2021, with key stakeholders in the industry and the general populace sharing their opinions. Salient points have been raised, and the Act has stirred debates across the country. A section of the Nigerian populace believes it is the long-awaited, long-sought solution to the weaknesses of the petroleum industry, while another section believes that without some details addressed in the new act, the country may be finding the embers of chaos. Today on VSA, we have key stakeholders to discuss their positions on the law and what it means to them and Nigerians. Welcome, I'm Sulaiman. Well, across the petroleum industry, there have been different opinions on the newly assented Petroleum Industry Act. Optimists believe it is the way forward, and those in disagreement have posited that it may steer more trouble for Nigeria despite the good intention behind its actualization. Hotly contested are the percentage going to the host communities and various other developments in the Act, including the establishment of the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority, the expected stature of the NNPC as a limited company, the frontier basins and the percentages, the scrapping of several acts, including the PPPRA Act and a host of others. Production sharing contracts, taxation of international oil companies, that's otherwise called IOCs, protection of host communities, and the duties of the IOCs on maintaining the stability of their operating environments have been on the forefront in the last few days. The distribution of oil licenses and bringing an end to the unaccountable and corrupt past of the industry have become stories that have necessitated experts' analysis and discussions. The powers ceded to the Minister of Petroleum have also been contested by the Southern Governors Forum, 8 of whom are governors of oil-producing states in Nigeria. But despite their complaints and disavowal of that part of the bill, their calls seem to have fallen on deaf ears. Petroleum stakeholders like Pengassan and Nupeng have been communicating with their positions, with Pengassan throwing its weight behind the 3% ceded to host communities. Both bodies, while hailing the passage of the bill, have identified grey areas, including the exclusion from the Board of Industry Regulators and the restriction of import license to only few refiners in the country. They've also called for a single regulatory body for the petroleum industry in Nigeria. Now, joining me this evening to look at this all-important issue that is trending in Nigeria is Elvis Don-Kemezuo. He's the chairman, Bayelsa Business Council. Thank you for your time, Elvis. And of course, Peter Esele, former president, Pengassan, that's the Petroleum and Natural Gas Senior Staff Association of Nigeria, and also one-time president of the Trade Union Congress, TUC. Let me start with you, Peter, quickly here. I recall Pengassan as a body pushed very hard for the bill. Now, now you're not there, but as I say, once a president, always a president of a union. But it seemed as if the messiah for the petroleum industry sort of can easily go to your body, the Pengassan. What do you think about the presidential assent to the bill as a Nigerian?
I think first thing is this has been the longest journey of any act in the country. So from OIC to PIGB to PIB, and now finally to PIA, which is Petroleum Industry Act. I think I've listened to a lot of Nigerians, and I've also done a series of interviews. I would rather look at the glass as half full rather than half empty. Yes, there are issues around it. Yes, Pengassan, I was also part of their meetings when they invited to also seek my opinion. I think it would have been better if we have a single regulator, but now we have multiple regulators. And then the issue of the host community, I think that is more political. And then if you look at it now, 3%, the GMD, they are talking about $500 million going to the host community. But what should attract us is laws and policies are not major problems in Nigeria. One of our major problems is our ability to enforce and implement policies. Now, where are we likely going to face a lot of challenges? Is first of all, you have to now identify who are the host communities. Is it the oil-bearing communities, or because I'm beginning to hear now that what I'm hearing now is some people are saying they are also host community because the pipeline passed through their community. So if you have a pipeline going through that, I think the government need to also define that. Because once the pipeline passes through any community, there is one-time payment that is made for that pipeline. So in my own estimation, I don't think when the pipeline passes through your community, you should be part of the host community. Another aspect that we also need to look at is the expenditure, X amount of money from the expenditure, which is the 3% that will go to the host community. Is we need to ask ourselves, how do we get that actual figure? We all know how companies operate. Companies are, first of all, there to make money, and they are there to make business. So if they want to make money, who carries out the check to ensure that what they are reporting is actually what should be reported? On the investment angle, that's why I said the glass is half full rather than half empty. It will stimulate employment in the sense that there are incentives for people to invest in gas in the country. There are also room for investment also in the downstream sector. So it's more of how do we balance it. We also have issues is that you have NNPC now. NNPC is going to the stock market. Yes, NNPC for the first time will be paying dividend in September or October, because before you go to the stock market, you must have 3 years of dividend payment. Now, NNPC now goes to the Ministry of Finance. 60% of it will be owned for the Federation by the Ministry of Finance. I also have issues with that in the sense that Ministry of Finance, we know the politics involved. Why don't we, and 40% will go to the Nigerian public? So I would have preferred we reverse it. 60% goes to the public and 40% to the government, so that we are able to avoid all those political interference and whoever comes to power. So these are some of the sticking points, but as we progress, maybe I will give you further.
I'm excited because now you have actually touched on some of the key things here, because we started this conversation as soon as the story broke here in Nigeria, and one big issue is trying to define who is an oil-producing, community. And I'm happy that will also be something that should concern Elvis. Elvis, again, thanks for joining us and thanks for your time. I know you were on a journey, so you had to make this stop to be a part of this show. Quickly here, Elvis, talking about communities now, we're looking at the 3%, which, according to the Act, will be ceded to host communities. What's your take on this? Do you think that this is something... because sometimes we hear stories of it's not enough. The communities we are actually asking for something greater. Are you okay with the 3%?
Well, good evening, viewers, and thank you for having me. Like my senior comrade has also likely mentioned, host communities agitated for more. You can recall that in 2008, the President Yaradua administration hasn't launched this bill to the Act. So then it was a bill to the Senate, to the National Assembly, added 10% for oil host communities. And unfortunately, because of the lack of political will and politics that arose at that time between the North and South dichotomy, created serious lapses that eventually was relaunched by President Jonathan in 2012. Host communities have bear the brunt in terms of environmental degradation and all of that we suffer here, bearing the brunt from the oil exploration activities. Therefore, we had requested that just as it were in the 50s, where groundnut pyramid was the order of the day in the country and the way it was being practiced then, we had requested that some level of consideration be given to host community. But unfortunately, what we see today is not what we expect. But however, given that at where we should be grateful, first and foremost, that we have something better than none. And unfortunately, at the time when this bill was being debated, at the eve of conclusion, most of our representatives were not seen in the floor of the House. Yes. And it was unfortunate that governors of the South and host oil producing states, which were supposed to galvanize our rep and then mobilize them to play the politics by mobilizing their friends in the North to support us, at least to increase it to what the House of Rep had nominated for 5%. But unfortunately, when these issues were raised in the House, most of our representatives were not even at the floor of the Senate to debate these issues. So it's quite unfortunate, but given that as it were, what I expect now is that, which a lot of mixed reactions is going here in the South. I am just in Bayelsa State. What I expect here is governors of the host states to begin to mobilize to set up, in quick reaction to what the president has just assented, to set up oil-producing developmental boards that will monitor the host community trust funds so that there will be adequate implementation, as it were. Because you see, the problem we have in this country is implementation. Having set up this act, signed this act into law, the problem we'll be facing now is to ensure that everybody who is supposed to contribute his equity to this fund is complies. Because you can see one of the problems the NDDC is facing today is similar situation. The NDDC Act was set up, I think, in 2000, and it was also recommended that both oil companies contribute 3%, and then federal government also contribute its quota. But unfortunately, as we see today, it's just the oil companies' funding that have been carrying NDDC today. The federal government is owing NDDC close to over 3 trillion naira. So you can see that the unbundle of the NNPC, which is good, but I still feel that the contribution quota might be part of the problem that we'll continue to see in going forward.
All right, okay, Elvis, thanks for establishing that for us. And I think you're on the same page with Peter, because Peter is also not too comfortable with implementation. But as we rightly said, in our opening, we'll get to that part of it. But quickly here, Peter, he also made mention of NNPC. That's another issue. A lot of people need clarity because the government has come up to say in the next 6 months, Peter, we're likely to see NNPC go fully commercialized. So help us here. When a government tells the people that the national oil company will go fully commercialized in the next 6 months, I'm quite sure you've been able to gauge some of the concerns of Nigerians. A lot of Nigerians are hoping or asking, wait a minute, will this affect subsidy? What will this mean for us as a people? What will this mean for Nigerians?
Yes, I think down the road it's going to affect subsidy. Of course, I'm not going to talk the way a politician is going to talk here on this show, because I read in the front page of some newspapers today where the Minister for State for Petroleum, says subsidy remains, fuel still remains at 162. But you and I know that's not going to happen. In 6 months, currently now, I'm aware, there's an ongoing discussion behind the scene between Pengasson, Newpeng, NLC, TUC, and the federal government on the appropriate pricing of the petroleum product. So in 6 months, if they go for commercialization, you are likely going to have prices in the increase of petrol. And then when they also talk about in 6 months, what they intend to do, NNPC has to go to CAMA, which is a corporate, which of course means NNPC is now a company which government wants to achieve. It wanted to achieve that. What government is also trying to achieve is help us open the books of NNPC. I'll give credit to the current GMD. At least for the first time in 40 years, we know the account of NNPC, that NNPC is bleeding, is actually not generating any income. So we are going to wait and see where they're getting money from to declare dividend. So if you now go in aspect of commercialization, NNPC's peers, when Nigerians are talking about NNPC, what most of us remember NNPC for is importation of petrol and kerosene and diesel. And I will remind you that the NNPC, their peers are the Aramcos of Saudi Arabia and Statoil of Norway. Statoil of Norway actually had some of their trainings in Nigeria before they become a behemoth of the oil industry. So the government, that is where the government is actually thinking of going, of opening NNPC up, making Nigerians know what it's all about. There are other aspects of the economic aspect which gladdens Pengasem, which also gladdens me, which has to do with the tax incentives. And then if you look at our laws that have to do with petroleum industry, you have several laws over the years. So what we have now is we now have a single document that regulates the entire industry. So that document, the aspect of it that will help to create jobs, create employment, stimulate the economy, that is very good. Then the other aspect of it is where you have the host communities, 3% or no 3%, government contribution, those are political. Those can always be resolved. And one of the challenges where you're having people say X, Y, Z now, politics, is that even, I will be very clear, and I will let my friend in Bayelsa also know this, that even the governors, he was alluding to governors not showing interest. I'll tell you categorically, governors were not supportive of it. I will still tell you that I still know how these bills was moving 3 months ago, 4 months ago. Governors were not behind it. Because why would governors be behind it? Because whether you like it or not, you are having a new structure of governance that is coming up in the host community that will be free of governors' interference. And one of the reasons why that was taken out of the governors is that you all know what the governors have done with the local government structure. The local government is non-existent. So the governors decide what will happen there. And long ago, Pengasem have also spoken to governors collecting 13%, that why don't we also have 13% of the 13%? What that means is that 13% of the 13% will go to the oil-bearing communities in the states, from Bayelsa to Delta to Akwa Ibom to Rivers, but we don't have that. So governors get 13% and decide what they will do with it. My advice to the host communities is that what is going to come now is that they should all sit down and decide what development they want for their community. You have to have short-term, medium-term, and long-term. Some people are not happy that they did not get 5%. But I will say that 3% is better than 0%. And where we were, because I have been following this bill now till it became an act. And I know that love Buhari or hate Buhari, we can give him, when things are also done, let's commend him for this, being the president that is able to get this over the hurdle. And another aspect that is also generating furor is the 30% frontier basin exploration. We have 7 basins in Nigeria, 5 in the north, 2 in the south. And one of the things we've been suffering in this country has been bane of our development is the north and south divide. If oil is struck in the north, fair and good. That means we've increased our reserve. Our reserve currently is about, the plan of the government is to increase the reserve by 40 billion. What we have will only last 50 years. And when you think 50 years is just around the corner. So what the government wants to do is to expand it. I may not completely support the way they are going about it, but I will stick to my earlier position that a glass that is half full is better than a glass that is half empty.
But I'm happy because it looks like both of you, Peter and Elvis, you're speaking the same language. But again, you know, for Elvis, he's on the side. He's also commended the government, but his butt there has to do with the representatives of the people. He thinks that, well, they didn't do quite enough for them to get a better deal out of this act. But Elvis, I'm bringing you back. Listening to Peter, he said something very important here. He said something that the host communities must also ensure that they play their own part here. As it stands, this is not cast in stone. For every law in Nigeria, as we understand, there is always a room, a window for that law or that act to be revised, to be reviewed. Now, very quickly here, look at some of the key things that the states, the communities are talking about. What goes to the communities? They say well, there isn't a line that can actually help safeguard that 3% that will come to them. What if there is a default by the IOCs to remitting this 3% to the host communities? Have you been able to have this conversation, even though this is still early in the day, Elvis? Is this something that your Bielsa business group is, dealing with at the moment? Are you putting up a kind of a proposal to the government just in case this will be rejigged?
Well, I don't think that would be an issue at all because there are many mechanisms at which remittance have been taking place before this time. Even the Local Content Act remits 1% from all oil and gas operations. It has been automated from the payment point. So I don't think that would be an issue. But however, given that sometimes we may find ourselves in a situation where there could be some lacuna in the law. I believe our people will have to reconverge again to meet to see how we can all speak in one voice. I'm aware that PANDEF has released a statement querying the acts and then raising fears on those gray lines. The Joint Council, which I was former president, will also raise some issues and then issue a statement. I think sooner or later you will jointly hear from the people of the region. I don't want to specifically speak for any locality or ethnic nationality at the moment because I can see consultations are still ongoing. But however, I believe given to the fact that we're in a global society, things are being done digitally. I believe that with the honesty of the federal government and President Buhari being a disciplinarian, I think that under his watch, he would not allow such kind of sabotage to happen, considering the volatile nature of the security situation of the country, especially in the south.
Before I come to Peter, I want to stay with you, Elvis, quickly here because I want Peter to also take off where you stop, and it has to do with the development of the regions. Peter raised a very important, concern, and it has to do with implementation. Keep in mind, now that this act is here, it will seem as if the region now, has three legs of that can actually bring development to the region. We're talking about the NDDC. We're talking about the 13% derivation that comes through to the states. And now you have the act. How can you've been a youth leader, now you chair a very big one there. What are those concerns that you think that the youth of the region can bring on to ensuring that these three legs, for the first time in the history of Nigeria, will all, be for the genuine development of the, oil-producing regions or communities?
Well, Suleiman, one thing you should know is that the practices at which the oil and gas sector has been sitting on is a act that was established in 1969. And as it were today, as it's being practiced all around the world, countries had re-strategized on processes on how to operate on and manage their oil and gas processes. For we in the region, I don't think it's going to be an issue because we have long been yearning for this. The communities and leaders, we are aware of how things have been done elsewhere in other parts of the world. And if 3% is even, because it's clearly defined, as it were today, there's what they call CDC in every community. Community Developmental Board. There's what they call GMOUs, oil companies, international oil companies have with host communities. These are avenues at which they use to mobilize the communities in terms of GMO agreements on what set of projects that will be carried out. So it's not as if there is no structure as it were for now. Those structures are already in place. All we needed to do is to enhance the structure and ensure that people with credible integrity are appointed into those boards, because now there is a guarantee of constant resources to fund those projects. So you can see technicians, professionals will be able to come in those boards. Before, it was left for community with referrals to probably most of the time to manage because of the honesty of the IOCs. But today, we don't have to be waiting for IOCs to come and tell us what project that we need to execute in our community. We, the host community, will be able to come out with the immediate need of the community in terms of healthcare, in terms of access road, pipeline water, etc. And then, since there's an existing platform, those platforms will just be encouraged and then reinvigorated to manage the process. I think that answers your question.
Let me bring in Peter here, who's been a player, in the industry and someone who's actually gone round. Because sometimes when we talk about issues concerning petroleum sector, many Nigerians will be asking, why is it that we have Petrobras of Brazil, Saudi Aramco, and still you can't even get anything near the gains and development we've seen in these countries. Now, you've had Elvis, Peter, and the thing here is that a lot of people are asking, it looks like for the first time we're about to see a boom in development in oil producing, communities in Nigeria. If all three can actually work the way it is expected to go. So take us through what hasn't actually been functioning for the first two, NDDC and 13% derivation that comes to the states.
First of all, it's very clear, corruption. One is corrupt practices and lack of structure. And then when I also use the word lack of structure, and we also lack the discipline to follow through. And I'll give an example. I work for an oil company, and when I was working for this oil company, and there's a community liaison officer. When I heard from my brother in Bayelsa, he spoke very well, and I wish things can be that way. But I'll tell you from my own history, we have a community liaison officer, and then my general manager was an American. The company was an American company. And then he was driving from his quarters, and then he saw a primary school. He now decided that, let's drive in. And when he got in, there were no chairs, nothing. And he was not happy. So when he got to the office, and he made reference to the fact that, no, he called the community liaison officer and said, we need to provide chairs in that school. That will be our own. And after drawing up plans, making all the meetings, and we faced the most troubling block was that same community liaison officer, because he wanted something for himself. And the Americans was not ready to do that. So as a result, that project was killed. So that is one of the reasons why we are where we are. 13% would have been a catalyst for development. NDDC too would have also taken it to the next level. But you and I know that NDDC is also another cesspool of corruption. Because if NDDC has been living up to its billing, we will not be where we are right now. And then one of the other things I will also advise communities, please don't say this man is from my place, or this man is my brother, or this man is from the same ethnic group. So when the man is mismanaging funds, and then we all go out there, particularly the young ones coming up, and everybody's clapping for him. So this is a major pain. Now you have 13%, then you have the NDDC, and then you have another 3%. You are getting almost 20% already. And then you also have money coming from the federation account, which goes to that state. So you ask yourself, what's all this money being used for? So if we are able to sit down, put a structure in place, and of course, if we have anyone who is responsible for misapplication or misappropriation of funds, And then we should ensure that he's dealt with by the law. So if we do all of that, what will happen is that others who want to steal funds will not be careful because nobody actually want to go to jail. But if anybody knows that I take the money and tomorrow I get some people to carry placards and say that, oh, you are wishunting me because I'm from a particular region, and everybody lose sight of the development that money was meant for. This is what the divide and rule politics over time has created in that aspect. I lived in Port Harcourt, I worked in Bayelsa, I worked in Akwa Ibom, I worked in Cross River, and I worked in the hinterland. Baran was one of the places that I eventually went to. Baran, I went on a land rig, and I wept because I know the amount of crude that was coming out of Baran area. So ability for us to do what is right, for us to show love and commitment for the community, that is what will bring this development. I want to see development in these communities. There was my first time in Escravos. The whole of the place I was staying had light, but the entire community had none. But I know how far Chevron had gone ahead to develop that particular area. But this 3% should be a catalyst for everybody to stand up and stand up for the community and also stand up for Nigeria. Because if there is peace in Bayelsa and in all these oil-bearing communities, and then there will be room for foreign direct investment. There will be room for companies to employ more people from that same area. I know how Pengassin fought. Initially, when I started work newly, even up to roast about, and those laying my bed offshore were from either from India or Chinese. But we don't have that anymore. So we are making progress slowly, but we also have to play our own role.
We'll take a break, and when we come back, Elvis and Peter, we'll see how much of conversation we can bring on the table to seeing that the region gets, because Elvis did say something. He said something about the environmental degradation, which is very key. Peter, again, you also help us to see if the act will help minimize or help ensure a proper cleanup of these communities. That's when we return. Join us again. Well, the vested ownership of the petroleum industry and its shares is in the Ministry of Finance, a position some persons have also shown their displeasures with. Generally, the new Petroleum Industry Act is expected to bring accountability to an industry that has been tagged underperforming. Nigeria's 37 billion barrels of oil still untapped have been identified as great resources that will, in addition to other resources, steer the country's next economic drive. In recent times, many oil companies have avoided investing in Nigeria as they've chosen other African countries, majority of whom have just found the black gold, that's the crude oil. The act is expected to drive a new petroleum industry for the country and reposition it on the global scheme of things. Despite the many positives from this act, its stifling of competition in the industry have been identified as loopholes that must be corrected. Also of importance and largely unmentioned in the bill is the effect of IOC's operations on the natural environments, the losses suffered by locals, and the percentage of Nigerians in general through the effects of oil refining on the country's climate. Before the break, Peter alluded to that, and he was trying to also make reference to some of those things. The pictures you see on your screen those that have actually made a lot of people ask questions of how the cleanup will be done with an act that is already in place. Let me bring in Peter here quickly. Peter, these are actually pictures that will disturb anyone, being an industry player. Are you convinced enough that the same complaints of old by the host communities won't be repeated despite the bill and some of the issues raised, like environmental, pollution?
Well, when we're in the 21st century, it's quite easy for you to look at what is happening in Europe, America, in the oil and gas industry, and then you replicate it here. I think we have enough laws to take care of environmental degradation. Where there are issues right now is that because the government too we also dilly-dally, because whatever suit that is filed against government, whatever compensation that government has to pay, even if you tell one of the IOCs to pay you $10 million as compensation, what you are going to have is the Nigerian government will pay about 55%. So what you technically have, government will not want to pay, because even Nigerian government will not want to pay for any of those things. Another aspect is, in part of some of this, in this new act, is the need for the communities to protect a lot of these assets. Because in protecting this asset, that also make it easier for you to get your money. And if you also look at majority, I'm not saying there aren't areas where the IOCs there will be some accident whereby you have issues with the pipeline. But majority of this pipeline that you have, leakages, breakages here and there, they're virtually people tampering with the pipeline. And when you have people tampering with the pipeline, now we don't have any that have been prosecuted, any that have been brought to book. So at the end of the day, you have this environmental degradation. So if the host communities that we're talking about, one of the reasons why they are being given 3% is that, okay, fine, we are giving you this, so please also help to protect these assets. If you notice by SR Rivers, we've had less issues with crude oil pipeline or force majeure being declared, because we now have people who know the terrain, who are also now protecting some of these assets. But at the end of the day, I still believe that we have enough laws. Environmental protection agencies have always been there. So everybody needs to do what they are supposed to do. Anywhere anybody is lacking, and the person will face the music. And I can't stop saying this. You and I have had several interviews from your past, and now our problems here have to do with implementation and enforcement of our laws. My friend Ibaisa made reference to the fact that he raised a very fundamental issue there. He is more at ease that the IOCs will bring in their money. The challenge is, will the government also do their bit? Because with the current trend, and the IOC is also afraid of various challenges, even if you don't challenge them here, they can get away with whatever they are doing here. The host community can go to Hague or go to London and sue. So the IOCs will try, or go to the US, the IOCs will try everything possible to make sure that they don't suffer such image damage. But the Nigerian government just may not bother about that, and they just know that, okay, you go to court, we can be in court for 10 years. So there are laws that can help us protect our environment. And lastly, don't forget, we are actually not a crude oil nation. People always talk about crude oil. We're actually a gas nation. We have more gas than crude. So that's why this law is very attractive for me too, when it also talks about metering, gas flaring. If you know the kind of damage we do by flaring those gas, if you go to Port Harcourt, for example, you have fumes everywhere from your window, and you stay in a particular area. After a while, you have to pick your nose. You'll be surprised at what you are going to see. So now they're also going to come out with this law is ensuring that they invest in gas, or they pay certain amount for gas flaring, and the gas have to be metered.
Let me bring in Elvis here, because Peter said something about people who now help in protecting, some of these key national, assets. People in communities, youth in Niger Delta region, some of them have been engaged, in the area of security to help protect some of these, and also ensure that these oil thieves don't come to break these pipelines, which ultimately will, cause us some spill. how are you working with some of these, concerned body of youth in the region that has been very peaceful lately to see that they have a fair understanding of what the government is doing now? Because here you are, Elvis, having an understanding that this is 3%, but you would have expected more. But there are some others who wouldn't be thinking like you. Are you having a conversation with them to letting them see some of the other gains and also let them understand that, as Peter highlighted, that these are not cast in stone? There's a room or rooms for rejigging.
Suleiman, you see, I want to really thank you for raising this aspect of the discussion, because for me, it looks more or less like we want to wake the sleeping dog. And these issues about environmental remediation and oil spill cleanup, pollution control has been ongoing for a long time. But unfortunately, well, first and foremost, I'm grateful for the fact that there is an act, there's a department set up within the act to address issues. But I think within that act, it deals more about financial implication, what the contributions prior to the licensing, what the operator is supposed to show good faith in contributing certain, keeping aside certain contributions for environmental remediation. But you see, the issues is that before now, oil companies have been awarding contracts for oil spill cleanup. But the problem is the question you asked: how is it being done? How are you being cleaning? How the cleanup of this environment is being carried out is the problem. Like, I'm aware that we have a regulatory department called, sorry, it's just skipped my head. I'll remind you the name when it comes on to my when I recollect the name. We have a regulatory body, Ministry of Environment in this country, who are supposed to monitor the processes. But you see, they've been carrying out shared understandard processes to clean up the communities, and that has been the problem. So I think that the law should deal with more or less how this should be carried out and the penalty that should follow suit. You know, in 2012, I was interviewed by CNN and Al Jazeera because Ogoni Community Board took shell to U.S. Supreme Court. And in that interview, I realized that in America, it's a capital offense for you to not to carry out 100% detailed cleanup of oil degraded environment. Now, the problem is that some of these companies operating in the region, how do they quantify the spill? Some people, they quantify spill by bucket. Is bucket a unit of measurement? It's a question. So you see, the problem is a very dynamic one. And it worries me so much that, and I will tell you, because the practices at which they use in cleaning this environment is substandard. And then, okay, let me also jump to the issue about communities showing commitment to protect our environment. I've always laughed at the fallacy of saying that there is crude oil theft. There is nothing like crude oil theft. How do you quantify a crude oil theft of 200,000 to 300,000 barrels of crude oil in a day? Yeah, and how many oil is the oil company pumping through that pipeline that passes my community? My community is a host community of 2 shell flow stations. Now, and pipeline passes through. And what is the capacity of that flow station pumping crude oil through that pipeline in a day? And then the government will bring out significant figures like 200,000 to 300,000 barrels of crude oil stolen in Nigeria in a day. The question you ask yourself, is this act being carried out by the community people? And those community people haven't stolen and sold 200,000 to 400,000 barrels of crude oil in a day. We still be living in the community. For God's sake, we should not be telling ourselves lies in 2021. So the fact is that if the government is serious, I want to thank the Minister for State for Petroleum and the President for assenting to this act. You know, it's a welcome development, but we should deal more of the issues like you asked on how these things are going to be done. we are very curious to the fact that we want to see things done the right way, and we are watching because you see there are professionals everywhere, and we are aware how things are being done in every other part of the world. So we want to see how these things are being done. Like I said earlier in my submission, that the way the government of Nigeria has treated the NDDC with levity as regards to their contributions to the NDDC development quota is worrisome to us as to how they will contribute their own equity to this project. Because I still realize that from the act that has just been signed into law, there is still a JV existence of a JV agreement embedded in the Upstream Regulatory Commission. So that means there's still going to be a sharing formula between the federal government and the oil companies. And then the 3% deals with the operational cost. So that means the operational cost is going to be shared between the oil companies and the federal government. So that is just my concern. But I hope that in the nearest future, the act will be revisited to strengthen it to fit the current challenges.
Well, let me let Peter weigh in on this. Now you're talking about, different streams. Quickly here, Nigerians are yet to see the act, but working on the bill. Section 52 of the bill created the midstream and the downstream regulatory authority, which would carry most of the regulatory activity of the industry. Peter, do you think this singularity of regulatory powers is a threat to competition?
Yes, because left for me, I don't think we should have upstream or we should have downstream. They should have left it the way it is. We have whatever you want to call it, we have Directorate of Petroleum Resources that was responsible for it all. So now what you have now is you're also creating more bureaucratic bottleneck for business. And then when you create those bureaucratic bottleneck, you're also increasing your recurrent expenditure. So when you are doing all of that, at the end of the day, you find out that you are not making business friendly. So, but if you now also come with those regulators that we're talking about, upstream, downstream, you may have people with different views. Elvis made reference to Ministry of Environment. We all know that Ministry of Environment actually is not doing anything. What we should have been looking at for is not just creating a regulator, but creating a functional, technically savvy regulator. I'll take you back to when we had Directorate of Petroleum Resources. Take, for example, I was on Bonga Field, and the DPRO personnel had to come visit Bonga Field to carry out their routine inspection. And they had to fly the helicopter off the IOCs. The IOC have to put them in a hotel. That is not what it's supposed to be. That's not what you expect of a regulator. A regulator is supposed to be independent and be able to financially carry out whatever his duties are. But what you have now is that the regulator virtually depends on the IOCs to carry out its regulatory function. So what are you expecting from such? So if we are really serious, I keep talking about it's how functional the quality and the capacity and the competencies of those we are putting in place, those we are putting to occupy such offices. That itself is also another bane. He also made reference to cleanup. If you look at how cleanup is done, Gulf of Mexico, the cleanup that was done in Gulf of Mexico by BP, and if you have an idea, BP paid billions of dollars, over $12 billion to resolve that issue. They had to do the cleanup coast to coast and pay farmers who lost their means of livelihood. Why was BP now ready to make that payment? They accepted responsibility for it because there was a structure, there is a system, and there are laws that must be enforced. And then for you to do the cleanup, you must get the best people to do the cleanup. I support what this was saying. Some cleanups in this country, man, they are laughable.
So I actually caught you smiling when he was saying that you shook your head because you have a sense of what Elvis was saying, and the world witnessed that very unfortunate incident, off the shores, the BP oil spill, and now everything is done and dusted. But again, quickly, I want you to weigh in on this. Let me bring in Elvis before I let you close on this. Elvis, give us the situation report of the Ogoni cleanup.
Well, to be frank with you, I do not have the current status of how far they have gone, but I'm aware that the UN Undersecretary or the UN Deputy Secretary General Mohammed, the Prime Minister for Environment, had been pressing on federal government and the Oil International to ensure that they do not renege on the commitment made to clean up Ogoni. But so far, I've been told that there have been lack of payment of funds. And the oil companies had been yelling that due to the inability of government to pay in their cash call, they have been unable to pay in contractors. So contractors and equipment are lying shallows in the Ogoni area. In fact, as a matter of fact, 2 weeks ago, I visited Kukana. And unfortunately, I passed through several points where some company, and I wouldn't want to mention their names for the sake of respect, were carrying out some cleanup activities. But unfortunately, nothing was being done at the moment because due to inability for them to access funds. So that comes back to the issue of funding, which will be one of the significant problems. And then another thing is that Nigerian governments oftentimes pressure this oil company to cut costs. And when they cut costs, by so doing, they award substandard contracts and the inability of contractors to meet up demand with international standard equipment that are being used to clean up the region. Like you mentioned about BP, you can see that BP use modern sophisticated machines to clean up the Gulf of Mexico. And meanwhile, that similar period, something like that happened in Bonga. But what did we see? You know, the effects of our aquatic lives and all of that. But yet, no compensation was made, and the government just after a while, as usual, swept the issues under the carpet. It's quite unfortunate that we're still...
Moment here, apologies, Elvis. Let me bring in Peter so that we can close. We're really running out of time. Peter, you've heard him. Situation isn't looking good, and you are also an expert. You've also raised, you are the one that raised, you drew the comparison between what is happening in Nigeria and what occurred in the Gulf of Mexico. Let's close on this. So how can the government, reduce the complaints, over the PIA, the Petroleum Industry Act?
Transparency. Transparency is key. Government must be transparent. Government must do what it has agreed to do. Government must contribute its own quota. I sympathize with the IOCs and the oil exploration company. One of the reasons why I sympathize with the IOCs is that the IOCs will do all in its power to make sure that the business moves. The government, as usual, most times renege on their promises. So if government is transparent, government stick to the law, government has respect for law, government will go ahead to do everything it has agreed to do. If government agree that we are making X amount of money available for cleanup, government should play its own role. So when government is not doing all of this, that's when we start having problems. The major problem we have is actually government. But we are going to give this current administration benefit of the doubt and hope that the challenges in this sector, if it cannot eliminate it completely, that at least it will be substantially reduced. And then we can all start dreaming that someday we'll have an Aramco in NNPC. Thank you for having me.
Well, that's a fine place for us to say many thanks for being such a nice company. Elvis Donkemezua, and who is the chairman Bayelsa Business Council, and Peter Esele, the former president of Pengasson. Many thanks. Hopefully, finally, Nigeria's Petroleum Industry Act will steer the nation to greatness and place it where it rightly belongs. It's about time. Many thanks for watching VSA Today. I'm Sulaiman. Bye-bye.